If every UFC fighter was currently in their prime, what would be the fights to make at every weight division? Starting out at 125, it's obvious. It's Pantoja versus Mighty Mouse. Look, I'm going to be leaning Pantoja in this matchup. I think he's a little bit longer. I think he's a little bit more rangy. He's very well-rounded, same as Mighty Mouse. I think Pantoja would get the job done, though. I think Pantoja has showed more dominance at his current 125-pound division than Mighty Mouse did back in his day. And I don't think it was... the competition wasn't as stout as it is now. So, look, I'm going to go Pantoja. At 135, I think it would be Merab versus Cejudo. And look, I know they fought, but that wasn't an in-prime Cejudo. That was a retired, came back in. Cejudo got manhandled, but I think prime Cejudo versus Merab would be a very, very close fight. Now, Merab is bigger than Cejudo. He's got better cardio than Cejudo, but Cejudo is a better wrestler. And better wrestling versus better cardio wrestling, both striking isn't all that great. I think Cejudo, once again, probably is a better straight-up boxer than Merab, but Merab's got better cardio. I think that would be an amazing fight, Merab versus Cejudo. Now, at 145, I've got two options. I've got the biggest pay-per-view of all time, Ilya versus Conor McGregor at 145. Everybody would love to see that fight, no doubt. It would be a very 50-50-esque fight. I think Conor would win. I think Conor would beat Ilya, both in their prime at 145. I think Conor's longer. I don't think Ilya would be able to wrestle with him. I think it would be a straight kind of kickboxing match, and I think Conor's got a little bit more crafty vet tools in the bag to beat Ilya. Now, the other fight I would want to see at 145 is Volk versus Aldo. Now, Aldo in his prime, I think could give Volk a run for the money. Some people might say they already fought, but I mean Aldo in his prime, pre-Conor McGregor. I think Aldo would probably edge out Volk, but look, I think Ilya versus Conor and Volk versus Aldo, I think those would all be very competitive fights. At 155, obviously it's Khabib versus Islam. Everybody wants to see this. And I do think Khabib would win. Most people are going to say Islam is more skilled. Maybe he's more well-rounded, but I think Khabib would be able to out-wrestle him. And you just can't beat the... Khabib, it wouldn't feel right for Islam to beat Khabib. The other fight I would want to see, and I know they fought as well. Look, I'm picking a lot of fights that they did end up fighting, but it would be Charles versus Tony, prime versus prime. Some people, once again, might say that Tony was in his prime, but look, I think Charles versus Tony would be a very exciting kind of unorthodox versus unorthodox fighter. It'd be a war. At 170, it's clearly Usman versus GSP. And this is, once again, a pure 50-50 toss-up. Usman's got a little bit of size on him, in terms of height as well as just weight. GSP's probably a little bit more skilled. And prime Usman, his striking was good, but it wasn't great. I think GSP would edge him out, but it would be close. 185, another two guys that have fought, Izzy versus Silva. And look, I know Izzy beat him, but Silva was, 45 years old? I mean, Silva was getting up there in age. Anderson Silva prime versus Izzy prime. I do think Izzy would still win. I think Izzy's just a better version of Anderson Silva. 205, we've got Jones/DC versus Pereira. Look, I don't know which one would be more interesting. Probably Alex Pereira versus Jones. I think that one would probably be more interesting from a stylistic standpoint. DC would be, we've got the wrestling versus the striking. But I think Jones versus Pereira at 205, both in their prime, it would be a barn burner. It would be a barn burner. I probably would lean Jones. I think Jones has a little bit more resolve to be able to win those fights. We've obviously already seen Alex Pereira lose twice, only once at 205, but regardless. And at 265, we've got four guys that I would all like to see fight each other. Aspinall, Francis, DC, and Jones. DC and Jones would be definitely interesting at heavyweight. Jones isn't, I don't think, as dominant of a champ at heavyweight as he was at 205. DC seemed to be better at heavyweight than he was 205, so if those guys rematched with no drugs involved on Jones' part, I think DC might win. You've also got DC versus Aspinall, Aspinall versus Jones, Ngannou versus that. You've got Ngannou versus all of them, would be interesting. But yeah, those would be the fights to make. And if I could only pick three, I think Ilya versus Conor, we would have to